The sun was setting behind the tall trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lena, a 15-year-old girl, walked carefully through the thick forest, carrying a small basket. She had been collecting firewood and wild berries all afternoon, just like she did every evening. Her grandmother, Marta, was waiting for her at home, and she didn't want to be late. Lena's life had never been easy. She and Marta lived in a tiny wooden house at the edge of the village. They barely had enough to eat, and their clothes were old and patched. But Lena never complained. She loved her grandmother, and she did everything she could to help her. As she walked deeper into the woods, something strange caught her attention. It was a soft, distant sound, like a cry. At first, she thought it was an animal, maybe a lost kitten or a baby fox. But when she listened carefully, she realized it sounded like a baby crying. Lena's heart started to beat faster. Who would leave a baby in the forest? She hesitated for a moment, then followed the sound. The cries grew louder, leading her toward a thick patch of bushes. Pushing the branches aside, she gasped. Right there, hidden under the trees, was a small woven basket, and inside it were not one, not two, but 3 tiny babies. Lena's eyes widened in shock. The babies were wrapped in thin, torn cloth, their little faces red from crying. They looked so small, so helpless. One of them had tiny hands curled into fists, waving in the air. Another had big, dark eyes that stared at her as if asking for help. She quickly looked around, hoping to see someone. Maybe their mother. Maybe someone had just stepped away for a moment. But the forest was quiet. The only sound was the rustling of leaves and the soft whimpering of the babies. Lena knelt beside the basket, her mind racing. Who would leave them here? And why? It was getting dark, and the air was getting colder. If she left them here, they wouldn't survive the night. Her heart ached for them. She didn't have much, but she knew one thing. She couldn't leave them behind. Carefully, she lifted the basket. It wasn't too heavy, but she had to walk slowly to keep the babies safe. As she made her way back home, so many thoughts filled her mind. What would Marta say? Would they be able to take care of 3 babies when they'd hardly had enough food for themselves? And most of all, who did these babies belong to? She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change forever. Lena walked as fast as she could, carefully holding the basket close to her chest. The babies were still whimpering, their tiny bodies shivering in the cool evening air. Her heart pounded with worry. She had no idea what to do, but she knew she had to get them home safely. By the time she reached the small wooden house, the sky was dark, and a few stars had begun to shine. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and stepped inside. The warm glow of a small oil lamp flickered in the corner. Her grandmother, Marta, sat by the fire, mending an old blanket. Marta looked up and frowned when she saw Lena struggling with the basket. "What is that, child?" she asked, setting her sewing aside. Lena didn't answer right away. She gently placed the basket on the wooden floor and pulled back the cloth. The moment Marta saw the 3 tiny babies inside, her eyes widened in shock. "Dear heavens," she gasped. "Where did you find them?" "In the forest, grandmother," Lena said, her voice trembling. "They were all alone. No one was there." Marta's hand shook as she reached out and touched one of the babies. "Who would do such a thing?" she whispered. "Leaving them out there, they wouldn't have survived the night." Lena swallowed hard. "What do we do, grandmother?" she asked. "We can't leave them. They need us." Marta sighed heavily. "But child, we barely have enough for ourselves. We have little food, little money." She trailed off, looking at the babies. They were so small, their faces soft and innocent. One of them let out a weak cry, as if begging for help. For a long moment, silence filled the little house. Then, with a deep breath, Marta reached for the basket and lifted one of the babies into her arms. She held the child close, rocking gently. "We can't turn them away," she said, her voice softer now. "We will do what we can." Lena felt a wave of relief wash over her. "I'll work harder," she promised. "I'll gather more firewood, more berries. I'll find a way to help." Marta nodded. "We will figure this out together." That night, they made a small bed for the babies near the fire. Marta fed them warm milk drop by drop, using a tiny spoon. Lena wrapped them in old blankets, making sure they were warm. Slowly, the babies stopped crying and fell asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling peacefully. As Lena watched them, she couldn't help but smile. They were safe for now. But deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning. Someone had left them in the forest. Someone must be looking for them. And soon, the truth would come out. The next morning, Lena woke up early to the soft sounds of the babies stirring. She rubbed her eyes and looked over at them. They were still wrapped in the warm blankets she and Marta had given them, their tiny faces peaceful in the dim morning light. It was hard to believe that just last night, they had been left alone in the cold forest. Marta was already awake, sitting by the fire, deep in thought. She had hardly slept, and Lena could tell she was worried. "We need to find out where they came from," she said finally. "Someone must be missing them." Lena nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. But how? Who in their village would abandon 3 babies? And why? Later that morning, Marta wrapped the babies carefully and held one in her arms, while Lena carried the basket with the other 2. Together, they walked to the village square, where people gathered to buy and sell goods. As soon as they arrived, curious eyes turned toward them. "Lena, what are you carrying?" a woman asked, stepping closer. When she saw the babies, her mouth fell open in shock. "Where did you find them?" "In the forest," Lena replied, her voice steady but nervous. "I heard them crying and brought them home." Gasps spread through the small crowd. Whispers followed. Who would leave them there? Are they orphans? Maybe they belong to someone from another village. Elder Thomas, the village chief, soon arrived. He was an old man with a long white beard and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked at the babies, then at Lena and Marta. "This is very serious," he said in a deep voice. "We must find out who these children belong to." Some villagers nodded in agreement, but others exchanged uneasy glances. Then a woman named Madame Olga, the village midwife, stepped forward. She was a kind but mysterious woman who had helped deliver many babies over the years. She leaned over and studied the infants closely. As she looked at them, her face suddenly changed. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, she looked afraid. "What is it?" Marta asked, noticing the change in her expression. Olga hesitated, then whispered, "These babies, they look familiar." Lena's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Olga glanced around nervously, as if unsure whether she should speak. Then she shook her head. I am not certain. But I feel like I have seen them before. There is something unusual about this." The villagers whispered even more. Why would Olga recognize them? And why did she seem so afraid? Elder Thomas cleared his throat. "Until we know the truth, these babies must stay safe. But be careful, Lena. If someone left them in the forest, there may be a reason they wanted them gone." Lena swallowed hard. She had thought bringing the babies home was the right thing to do. But now, for the first time, she felt a chill of fear. What if saving them had put her and Marta in danger? For the next few days, Lena couldn't stop thinking about what Madame Olga had said. "These babies, they look familiar." The words echoed in her mind, filling her with questions. If Olga had seen them before, then someone must know where they came from. But why had no one come forward to claim them? Back at home, Marta did her best to take care of the babies. She fed them warm milk, wrapped them in soft blankets, and rocked them to sleep. Lena helped whenever she could, but deep inside, she felt restless. She wanted to find the truth. One evening, as Lena sat by the fire, one of the babies grabbed her finger. She smiled, watching the tiny hand curl around hers. But then something strange happened. The baby stared at her with wide, knowing eyes, as if recognizing her. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Was it just her imagination, or did the babies feel connected to her? That night, after the babies were asleep, Lena sat beside Marta and spoke in a whisper. "Grandmother, do you think they were left in the forest on purpose? What if someone didn't want them to be found?" Marta sighed. "I have been wondering the same thing, child. There is something unusual about all this." She hesitated, then continued, "Tomorrow, go see Olga. Ask her what she knows. Maybe she can tell us more." The next morning, Lena hurried to Madame Olga's small cottage. The old midwife was surprised to see her but let her inside. The room smelled of herbs and warm tea. Lena didn't waste time. "Madame Olga, please tell me the truth. You said the babies look familiar. Do you know where they came from?" Olga hesitated, then walked to a wooden chest in the corner. She opened it and took out an old piece of fabric. It was embroidered with a golden crest, an elegant, royal-looking symbol. "I have seen this crest before," Olga said. "Years ago, a noblewoman came to me, asking for help. She was with child, and she was afraid." Lena leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Who was she?" "Her name was Lady Ivana," Olga whispered. "She was from a powerful family, but something happened. Something that made her disappear. No one has seen her in years." Lena's eyes widened. Could it be possible? Were the babies connected to this missing noblewoman? But why would they be left in the forest? She asked. Olga shook her head. "I do not know. But if they truly are Lady Ivana's children, then they are in danger. Someone must have wanted them gone." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. This was no accident. Someone had tried to erase these babies from the world. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "I need to find out the truth," she said firmly. "I need to protect them." Olga gave her a serious look. "Be careful, child. You are stepping into something far bigger than you realize." Lena nodded. She didn't care how dangerous it was. She had to find out the truth before it was too late. Lena walked home from Madame Olga's house, her mind racing with thoughts. If what Olga had said was true, then the babies might be the children of Lady Ivana, a noblewoman who had disappeared years ago. But why had they been left in the forest? Who wanted to get rid of them? As she reached home, Marta was sitting by the fire, rocking one of the babies gently. The other two were asleep in a small wooden crib that Lena had built from scraps. When Marta saw Lena's troubled face, she knew something was wrong. "What did Olga say, child?" she asked softly. Lena sat down beside her and took a deep breath. "She told me that years ago, a noblewoman named Lady Ivana came to her for help. She was with child and afraid. No one has seen her since." Marta's eyes widened. "And you think these babies belong to her?" Lena nodded. Olga said she recognized something about them. Maybe their eyes, their faces, something reminded her of Lady Ivana. Marta looked down at the baby in her arms. If they truly are noble children, then someone must have wanted them gone. This is not just a simple case of abandonment. Lena shivered at the thought. Someone had deliberately left these innocent babies in the forest, hoping no one would find them. But why? That night, after Marta and the babies were asleep, Lena sat by the window, staring at the moon. She felt a deep sense of responsibility. The babies had no one but her and Marta. If they really were in danger, she had to protect them. The next morning, she decided to ask around the village. Maybe someone had heard stories about Lady Ivana or knew why she had disappeared. At the market, she spoke to an elderly woman who had lived in the village for many years. "Lady Ivana," the woman repeated thoughtfully. "Oh yes, I remember her. She was young and beautiful. But one day, she vanished. Some say she was betrayed by her own family." Lena's heart pounded. Betrayed? How? The woman leaned in and whispered. Her family had great wealth and power, but there were rumors that someone wanted to take her place, someone who saw her as a threat. No one knows what happened to her, but soon after she disappeared, Her family acted as if she had never existed. Lena's hands tightened into fists. Had her own family tried to erase her? And if so, were they behind the babies being abandoned? As she walked back home, she felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. She turned quickly, but the streets were busy, and she saw nothing unusual. Was she just imagining things, or was someone keeping an eye on her? That night, as Lena lay in bed, a single thought kept repeating in her mind. If Lady Ivana was still alive, would she come back for her children? Or was she gone forever? Lena couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Ever since she had started asking questions about Lady Ivana, she felt uneasy, as if unseen eyes were following her every move. Back at home, Marta was feeding the babies warm milk, humming softly to keep them calm. Lena sat down beside her, still lost in thought. "Grandmother," she said quietly, "I think someone in the village doesn't want me asking about Lady Ivana." Marta looked at her sharply. Did something happen? Lena hesitated, then nodded. "At the market today, I felt like someone was following me. When I turned around, I saw nothing, but I could feel it. And the way people talk about Lady Ivana, it's like they're afraid." Marta sighed. "There are secrets in this village, child, and secrets can be dangerous." Lena bit her lip. "But I can't stop now. If these babies are in danger, we need to know the truth." That night, Lena barely slept. The wind outside howled through the trees, making the small house creak. The babies were sleeping peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling with each breath. She sat up, watching over them, her heart filled with both love and fear. What if someone came looking for them? The next morning, Lena decided to visit Elder Thomas, the village chief. If anyone knew about Lady Ivana's past, it would be him. As she approached his house, she saw him sitting outside, carving wood with a small knife. He looked up as she came near. "Lena," he said in his deep voice, "I heard you've been asking questions." Lena hesitated. "Yes, Elder. I need to know about Lady Ivana." He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Come inside." Inside his house, the air smelled of old books and burning wood. Thomas sat down and motioned for Lena to do the same. "Lady Ivana was kind and gentle," he said slowly, "but her family was powerful. Some say too powerful. There were whispers that someone close to her saw her as a threat. And then, one day, she disappeared." Lena leaned forward. "Do you think her own family betrayed her?" Thomas's eyes darkened. "I do not know for certain. But I do know this: her disappearance was no accident. And if these babies are truly hers, then they were never meant to survive." A chill ran down Lena's spine. So someone wanted to erase them, just like they erased her. Thomas nodded. "You have done a brave thing by saving them, Lena. But be careful. There are those who will not be pleased that these children are still alive." Lena swallowed hard. She had thought she was simply helping 3 helpless babies. But now, she realized she was caught in something much bigger, a dangerous secret that someone was willing to kill for. Lena walked home from Elder Thomas's house, her heart pounding. His words echoed in her mind. If these babies are truly Lady Ivana's, then they were never meant to survive. She shivered at the thought. Who would want to harm innocent babies? And why? As she neared her house, she stopped suddenly. The door was slightly open. A terrible fear gripped her chest. Had someone been inside? Lena rushed in, her eyes darting around. The room looked normal at first, but then she noticed something. The small wooden crib had been moved. The blankets inside were slightly disturbed, as if someone had touched them. "Grandmother," she called, her voice shaking. Marta hurried in from the back of the house, worry on her face. "What is it, child? Did you leave the door open?" Marta frowned. "No. Why?" Lena pointed at the crib. Someone was here. Marta's face turned pale. She rushed to the babies, checking them one by one. They were still there, sleeping peacefully. But the thought that a stranger had entered their home made Lena feel sick with fear. Who could have done this? Marta whispered. Lena clenched her fists. Someone who knows about them. Someone who doesn't want them alive. That night, Lena and Marta took turns staying awake, watching over the babies. Every creak of the wooden walls, every rustle of the wind outside made them nervous. They were no longer safe. By morning, Lena had made up her mind. We can't stay here, she told Marta. If someone came once, they'll come again. Marta nodded. But where will we go? Lena thought for a moment. Then she remembered something. Madame Olga, she said suddenly. She knew Lady Ivana. Maybe she can help us. Without wasting time, they packed a small bag with food and wrapped the babies in warm blankets. Lena carried two, while Marta carried the third. They stepped outside, their eyes scanning the empty village road. The walk to Olga's house felt longer than usual. Lena kept glancing over her shoulder, afraid they were being followed. But the streets were quiet, too quiet. When they finally reached Olga's door, Lena knocked urgently. The door creaked open, and Olga's face appeared. The moment she saw them, her eyes filled with concern. Come in, quickly, she said, stepping aside. Inside, Lena explained everything. The break-in, the feeling of being watched, the crib being moved. Olga listened carefully, her expression serious. You were right to come here, she said finally. I have been thinking about these children, and I fear they are in great danger. Lena swallowed hard. Do you know who's after them? Olga hesitated, then said in a low voice, There is only one person who would go to such lengths to erase Lady Ivana's children. Lena's breath caught. Who? Olga took a deep breath and whispered, Her own brother, the man who now rules in her place. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. Lady Ivana's own brother, the man who now ruled in her place. But why would he do this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Madame Olga's face was filled with sorrow. Because if Lady Ivana's children are alive, it means they have the right to her family's wealth and power. Her brother wanted to rule alone. He made her disappear, and now he wants to erase these children too, so that no one can ever challenge him. Lena's heart pounded. She looked at the sleeping babies, their innocent faces unaware of the danger around them. They were the true heirs, but someone wanted them gone. Marta spoke, her voice trembling. What do we do, Olga? We cannot protect them forever. If he sent someone to find them, they will come again. Olga nodded. You are right. Staying here is too dangerous. You must leave the village before it's too late. Lena's stomach twisted. Leave? This was her home. But deep inside, she knew Olga was right. If they stayed, they would all be in danger. But where will we go? Lena asked. Olga took a deep breath. There is a place far from here, deep in the mountains. It is a hidden monastery. The monks there take in those who need shelter. If you can reach them, the babies will be safe. Lena looked at Marta. The old woman's eyes were filled with worry, but she nodded. We have no choice, child. We must go. Olga handed them a small pouch. This has some money and herbs for the journey. Travel only at night. Avoid the main roads. And trust no one. Lena took the pouch, her hands shaking. This was really happening. They were leaving everything behind. That night, under the cover of darkness, Lena, Marta, and the babies slipped out of the village. The air was cold, and the wind whispered through the trees. Every sound made Lena's heart race. She kept glancing back, afraid of seeing shadows following them. They walked for hours, their feet aching, their arms heavy from carrying the babies. But they couldn't stop. Not yet. Suddenly, Marta grabbed Lena's arm. Listen, she whispered. Lena held her breath. In the distance, she heard it. The sound of horses. Fear struck her like lightning. Someone was coming. We have to hide, she whispered urgently. They rushed off the path, slipping into the dense forest. Marta held the babies close, trying to keep them quiet. Lena crouched behind a thick tree, her heart pounding. The sound of hooves grew louder. Then, torches appeared in the distance. Men on horseback, searching. Lena held her breath. If they were found now, it would be the end.